Chapter 16, 026 hours, April 17th, 2539 military calendar. Me Trom system, far gas giant orbit, en route to Covenant support vessel. Solomon and the rest of Teal Force held their breath as the Pelican jettisoned out of the Prowler's hangar bay and into the depths of deep space. The interior lights clicked on and filled the troop bay with that familiar deep red light, affording time for the non-augmented crew, save for Solomon, to acclimate their night vision and prepare to navigate through the darkness of space. They were well over 2 astronomical units beyond the local star. So when they deployed from the Pelican, they would have to rely on their waypoint markers fed to their helmets to get on target. Solomon patched into the Pelican's display feed. As the reconnaissance Pelican shot out of the Death's hand like a bullet down the barrel of his rifle, he could see a shadowy figure veer off from their own trajectory back toward the Oort cloud and into relative safety. He felt a slight shudder under his sabotons as the Pelican conducted a quick burn to correct its course into a stable orbit around the unnamed gas giant. From here, they would experience a white-knuckled 6G rotation for approximately 12 minutes before they would arrive in position several dozen kilometers above the Covenant craft. After that, it was as simple as jumping out of the troop bay and gliding onto the hull undetected. Due to their size and speed, Solomon and the lieutenant had no doubt they could slip past the modest wing of Banshees and Seraphs undetected. "Check seals and secure equipment," Solomon said. He could see the ODSTs start to fidget as the gravitational pull began taking its toll on both their bodies and their psyches. Tough as nails and unyielding in a fight, but any man had his breaking point. Going in nearly blind on a suicidal mission and 6Gs without a pressure suit like his Mjolnir would cause anyone unease. "Equipment all secure, sir." Each of the squad leaders struggled to report over squad comm, the strain of the increasing gravity weighting on their chests. With his Mjolnir, Solomon wasn't suffering as much as the rest of the crew. The hydrostatic gel layer, sandwiched between a temperature-regulating tech suit and an outer layer of titanium, adjusted to the shifting gravitational forces to prevent his organs from bulging and blood pooling in his extremities. He took the opportunity to review the situation. Still patched into the Pelican's forward display monitor, Solomon could see the faint outline of the Covenant supply ship coming into view. As they neared, the centripetal force pushing against his suit began to ease. The Pelican reducing acceleration in preparation for Teal Force's debarkation. The amber lights winked off, the troop bay now in complete darkness, save for the last few pieces of electrical equipment bolted to the bulkhead of the Pelican, indicating that deployment was imminent. "Switch to suit air." At the command, many of the ODST troopers glanced down at their suits while their armor closed their external air filtration units and activated the integrated pressurized air canisters in their suits. Solomon's onboard computer did the same and switched on his air reserves as well. A faint string of text appeared on his HUD, indicating that he had 84 minutes and 30 seconds of air remaining and all systems performing nominally. The Pelican's aft ramp now began to descend once again. If he could turn around, he could imagine the stark nothingness of deep space, save for a few winking stars in the distance. A singular yellow light winked to life in the troop bay. Below the faint celadon light were the illuminated heads of 17 orbital drop shock troopers in rows of 3 or 4, all standing facing aft. He gave a quick look down and to the left, to see Lieutenant Green giving him a strained thumbs up. "Ready, Alpha Team," Solomon said. The bay light winked green. "Alpha Team." He waited one breath. The Pelican's navigational program synced with his onboard computer displayed a countdown timer in his HUD. "Go." The first 4 troopers detached their chest harnesses carabiners, and they drifted out of the troop bay into the empty vacuum of space. "Ready, Bravo Team," Solomon said with focus. This was one of the most, if not the most, unpredictable phase of the plan. If they got the timing wrong, Solomon and Commander Keller would be sending several good men and women to a premature death. There was the very real possibility that many Marines would simply miss the target, skip off its hull, or come up short, leaving them to die a slow and cold death by asphyxiation as their limited oxygen supply ran out. Solomon looked up and saw his countdown timer reach the 1-second mark. "Go," he said tersely. The second flight of Marines loosed the cords keeping them anchored in place and let their boots slide off the deck into nothingness. Now it was his turn to jump alongside Charlie Team. The countdown timer on his HUD was reset to 5 seconds. Enough time that the troopers before and after him could maintain dispersion and not have to worry about colliding with each other mid-approach. Ready, Charlie Team. A singular green light blinked in Solomon's heads-up display, courtesy of First Lieutenant Green, indicating that the 5 troopers in the Spartans' jump group had conducted final checks on their atmospheric seals, readied their weapons, and were in position for an extravehicular maneuver. The countdown timer now read 1 second. Go. Acting on muscle memory and impulse, Solomon detached the cord from a hard point on his Mjolnir armor, and his onboard computer deactivated the magnetic clamps on the bottom of his sabatons. He rocked forward with the rest of the ODSTs and began to slide forward. He sprung up slightly and felt the familiar stomach drop of 0G movement. The Spartan and the other 5 Marines turned their heads down toward the waypoint highlighted in their helmets. The flying octopus was several dozen kilometers away, and below them, the soft glow of light refracted from the gas giant's ionosphere reflecting off the Covenant craft. He glanced at his motion tracker to ensure that everyone was in position. The complement of 6 soldiers would disperse in a line while approaching the target so they could maintain relative spacing, but enough control if something would happen. There were 5 friendly lights flashing on the maximum boundaries of the motion tracker for an instant before they left his HUD. This was planned, and he didn't worry about the group disappearing from his radar. A cluster of 5 dark spots was much easier to spot and track than a single human-sized object. They were to maintain dispersion until they landed on the hull. He risked a glance to the left to visually confirm that no one had a malfunction or were straying off course. Solomon could only make out 1 of 3 Marines on his port side, but that was to be expected. The matte black finish of the ODST's armor with the backdrop of deep space was like looking for a needle in a stack of needles, even for a Spartan. Thankfully, each Marine had their friendly FOF tag lit on low power mode. Anything with too large of an unshielded electronic signature would trigger an alarm from the enemy ship. His armor's visor display highlighted 3 yellow name tags above imperceptible figures in the distance. Solomon straightened his neck and activated his suit's low-impulse propulsion jets situated on the armor plate just below the fusion pack. The inaudible puffs of the nitrogen-oxygen mixture kept him on target. The approach vector would display on his visor any deviation being attended to by his suit's computer. The waypoint at the end of the digitally projected flight path on his heads-up display showed 12 kilometers and closing fast. In space, objects traveled hundreds and thousands of kilometers per hour, so the program Ensign Bird wrote for the Pelican would call for Teal Force to accelerate to an adequate speed in order to reach the objective before the Marines' oxygen ran out. The speed would give them a window of time to latch onto the exterior, breach the hull, and move to a secure partition of the ship that maintained a breathable atmosphere. The display reached 4 kilometers, and Solomon outstretched his arms, preparing to grapple the hull and secure himself. Time was of the essence. Every second wasted on the hull of the support ship exponentially increased the changes of a collision with Delta Team, the last fire team of Marines to exit the Pelican autopilot. Now he could see the faint outline of the Covenant ship, a black blob against an even darker backdrop. He could only begin to make out the features of the ship. He squinted, his helmet automatically increasing the magnification on his faceplate. The exterior of the ship was coated in the familiar dull purple hue of the nanolaminate hull plating. He zoomed even farther and saw several dark figures clambering on the surface now like beetles scurrying over an upturned stone. Solomon's waypoint read less than a kilometer, and he braced himself for impact. At this speed, he'd reach the Covenant ship within seconds. The maneuvering thrusters on his back puffed one more time for perfect alignment, and he made landfall, breaking his momentum on an odd bull-bow sensor node closer to an aft dorsal propulsion exhaust. He quickly caught his bearings and made his way to a cluster of Marines. The Spartan was glad he had a polarized faceplate for what he saw next. Standing or kneeling before him were only 9 of the 13 helljumpers he was expecting to be in position. He positioned himself above an exterior ventilation shaft and shot a tight beam transmission to each squad leader, including Lieutenant Green as well. The platoon commander was still recovering from the impact on the hull. limping slightly and rubbing a forearm. "Sit, Rep," Solomon ordered. "Sirs, it looked like Frederickson and Malay from first stick overcorrected just before touchdown. They missed. With your stick, it looks like 9 of 13 present. Hull secure for now. We found this weird-looking ventilation shaft closer to the center of the ship. I think a little TCC should do the trick." The ODST was referring to their breaching mechanism, thermite carbon cord. That was Sergeant Deavy, leader of Bravo Team. He must have seen the misses from his vantage point on the way in. Frederickson and Malay were both part of Alpha Team, leaving them already at half strength. "Goddamn the Covenant," he fumed quietly. If only there was more time to plan. Before any Spartan deployment, days were spent in isolation planning, rehearsing, and marshaling resources to ensure success. This time, the entire situation was sour. Solomon, Arthur, Sheila, and Cal were pulled from their current assignments and dropped into this hastily formed quick reaction force, then thrown into a fight with an undermanned and ill-prepared colonial force to augment an understrength task force, and the other two. The sergeant paused before answering. He let out a heavy sigh, the weight of the mission already weighing on him. "The last 2 Marines were part of his stick. Mid-flight collision," he replied and checked the action on his MA-5B assault rifle. He motioned over to the sealed ventilation shaft. "Nothing we can do for them now, sir. Let's just get this done." He trailed his report to almost a whisper and turned his back to Lieutenant Green and Solomon. Solomon took the gesture in stride, pulled his own MA-5B off his back, and moved toward the shaft. As he approached the ingress point, there was already a Marine preparing the detonation package. The Marine pulled a tightly wound cord from a hard case on his thigh and began shaping it around the vent. "Stand by for breach," Solomon said over squad comm and aimed his rifle at the center of the shaft's closed blades. An instant later, he felt the soundless shudder of an explosion beneath his boots. A brilliant ruby-red light danced over the polarized faceplates of the Marines covering the entrance. The thermite carbon cord ate through the hull plating in seconds, bubbling up and instantly freezing into odd, mutilated shapes in the absolute zero vacuum of space. After several seconds of blazing heat, the meter-wide segment of the Covenant ship detached from its housing and drifted slightly out of position. The Marine in charge of the breach pried the remaining section of plating away with the barrel of his rifle and let it drift away. With the entrance now set, Solomon gave a cursory glance at his motion tracker. Delta Team, the last fire team to exit the Pelican, was in position to his rear providing security. More importantly, the tracker did not display any immediate threats from within the breach. It was always good to visually confirm the information, however. Back on Reach in what felt like a lifetime ago, Chief Petty Officer Mendez, the Spartan II's chief instructor, had always told them, "Equipment breaks, equipment fails. Never rely solely on your instruments, or you'll lose every time. No more mishaps," Solomon told himself and pulled his bulk into the cut section of hull. He passed through the entrance and landed on the deck with a soft thud, the artificial gravity of the alien vessel taking over. Solomon raised his rifle and surveyed the narrow corridor he found himself in. No threats presented themselves, so he clicked his helmet comm twice, indicating the all-clear signal to proceed. He motioned farther down the cramped corridor for the rest of the Marines to get situated. The passage was filled with various pipes, display readouts, and other maintenance equipment presumably left by the stewards running the ship. It was pitch black, save for Solomon's headlamp filling the jet black maw. "Is this a good place for the first charge?" A voice came over his helmet speaker. "Negative. We're in engineering. Based on other Covenant vessels we've boarded in the past, the charge would disable the ship but probably wouldn't destroy it. We need to move farther below deck and locate the power plant." "Let's get out of here then." That was Lieutenant Green over the channel now. "Devi, we're splitting up. You'll take Alpha Team toward the command deck and secure the bridge. If we can salvage the ship, Oni will be our new best friends. If not, that's what our Spartan friend is here to help us with." Green was referring to the group's contingency plan to scuttle the vessel entirely. At the beginning of the war, the Office of Naval Intelligence created a standing order to recover any and all Covenant technology with specific items on the top of the list. And intact or partially intact was still one of them. Up until now, sparse resources had been recovered even after a decade of war. There had been several attempts to capture ships by the Spartans, but no attempt had since been successful. Perhaps this would be the silver lining in the rapidly degrading situation in the Me-Trom system. Solomon and the rest of Task Force Lima were optimistic they could repel the Covenant fleet long enough for help to arrive, or, at a minimum, to evacuate as many civilians as possible. Sergeant Devi bumped his partner's shoulder, the remaining Marine from his stick. 2 other Marines fell in next to him, a staggered formation with 3 soldiers facing forward and 1 rearward to provide security. He had folded the remaining Marines from Alpha Team to constitute a full fire team. Garcia, Delta will stay here and babysit our exit. Find a spot with breathable air and refill those tanks, but be ready for a hot extract, just in case. That left Lieutenant Green, Solomon, and Charlie Team to secure the support vessel's power plant and place their own Octa charge. The primary objective was now to disable the craft and simultaneously take control of the bridge. With any luck, the lone ship would exit the gas giant's gravity well and drift farther into space where a recovery vessel could dock with the flying octopus and hand it over to Oni's Xenomaterials Exploitation Group. Each group set off in different directions. Bravo Team took a path backtracking through several dozen meters of engineering catwalks and crawl spaces. It would be slow-going, but safer than taking the main corridors. The mission might take longer, but the humans had the element of surprise. Charlie Team took a more direct approach, heading toward the depths of the vessel in search of the power plant. From Solomon's experience, human architecture favored their bridges in the bow and their power plants in their sterns. A tradition started thousands of years ago in the ancient naval battles on Earth's seas and oceans. Ship captains needed to survey the terrain and battle space visually as events unfold. The Covenant, however, did not think or act like humanity. Solomon had first boarded a Covenant vessel during a bold joint operation between the Spartan IIs, under the command of their titular squad leader, Master Chief John 117, and an entire battalion of the ODST's finest space assault unit. The infamous Black Daggers, who specialized in zero-G operations and irregular warfare, were pivotal to the task force's success, even with several sabotage attempts by an undercover insurrectionist officer and his cadre. Working with Spartan Green Team, Solomon gained first-hand knowledge of the Covenant frigate's layout. Their command bridges were usually located deep within the belly of the vessel, and their power plants aft and below deck of that position. Solomon took point, leading the fire team through the unusually tight corridors. The Covenant's modus operandi for ship architecture was usually vast open chambers with ornate symbols lining the walls of their purple nanolaminate bulkheads. Each hallway, corridor, or ship system featured grandstand vaulted ceilings, considered a waste of space on any human vessel. The passage they were navigating was nowhere near grand, he thought. They came up to a 3-way junction in their path, and his shoulder pauldrons narrowly scraped by tugging slightly as he pushed himself through the gap. About 15 meters down the next dogleg, he saw a flash of movement and raised a fist. The column froze in place and shouldered their weapons. He clicked off his helmet's external light source and activated his visor's enhanced night vision overlay. The suit's systems augmented his already impressive vision with both ambient occlusion enhancement and thermal overlays, painting a matte color palette of reds, yellows, greens, and blues. At the end of the hallway were 3 heat signatures, grunt engineers by the looks of them. Utilizing hand and arm signals, Solomon slung his assault rifle and drew the combat knife from a sheath on his chest plate. The Marines fanned out to cover his flanks and the rear in case something would go wrong. He began to stalk forward, utilizing the many shadows cast in the eerie, deep purple deck lighting. The trio of grunt engineers were conversing with each other in those odd, high-pitched squeaks and growls, while milling about what looked like a tank of methane gas. Their breathing apparatuses were draped over hooks on the tank while they took turns sucking from tubes and feeding nipples, providing them with some sort of sustenance. The Spartan emerged from the shadows and sank the serrated combat knife into the first victim's neck. By the time the rest of the trio even noticed what was happening, Solomon threw the first body to the ground, dove onto the second thrall, and plunged the blade deep into its skull. The third grunt began to sputter and gasp as it pulled away from its only source of breathable atmosphere. Panicked, and ran farther down the corridor without a weapon or methane tank. Solomon rolled to his feet, extracting the knife from the survivor's friend, and threw the weapon end over end to find purchase in the base of the last grunt's neck. It crumpled to the deck in a wheezing heap. He stepped over the bodies of the first two and worked a path toward the writhing grunt. With a sickly crunch under his sabaton, it stopped moving. He gave the fire team the all-clear signal and sheathed the knife. The group continued to meander down the winding hallways for some time before the Spartans' oral sensors began to hum with the low-frequency tell of the ship's pinch fusion drives. Solomon referenced his chronometer to see their progress. They'd traveled just over 250 meters through the meandering passageways. The display read 24 minutes and 44 seconds on the mission clock. Historically, Solomon had found that the chances of being discovered and an overwhelming Covenant response increased exponentially after the first 10 or so minutes on the ground. Against the odds, they continued their mission with stealth and secrecy. The team approached a familiar-looking set of doors, the faint cerulean glow illuminating the ornate architecture embedded within the alien metal. The six-man fire team set up their security with Solomon crouching, warily approaching the entryway with his shotgun raised, and began to move toward the door. It slid open with a faint hiss to reveal another clutch of grunt engineers, several of the avian bird-like creatures the UNSC referred to as jackals, and an elite Sangheili overseer. The elite in charge turned around lazily, not expecting a group of humans to be on his doorstep. He shouted something they couldn't understand and dove to cover. "Contact front," one of the Marines shouted and brought his own assault rifle to bear. Immediately, the fire team began to pour effective fire through the doorway, tearing the unsuspecting and unarmed aliens to shreds. Only the elite was prepared. The jackals' frail bodies were being cut down without their personal energy shielding them, and the grunts were scurrying away with nothing but tools and machinery parts in their scaly claws. The elite's energy shields flared from a sustained burst of fire from one Marine, while Solomon was pushed into the room. He conducted a front roll and sprung to his feet within an arm's reach from the elite who was staggering from the wall of gunfire. Solomon raised the shotgun to his shoulder and fired, caving in the warrior's combat harness with a single round. He surveyed the area for additional contacts and found none. "Clear," he said, and began to cautiously move through the room. The Marines started to file into the vast chamber in a semicircle. Around them were several large machines which resembled boilers from ancient steam-powered power plants. To the left, situated in the far wall, were several storage tanks and spare pieces of machinery. Toward the end of the chamber, a massive dual spherical device was humming intensely and emanated a brilliant blue-white light, presumably the fusion reactor. Solomon approached the far end of the bulkhead and turned on his helmet's recording device. The eggheads in ONI Section 3 would eat this stuff. One of the Marines abruptly shouted a "hey" and opened fire. Solomon spun around and assessed the situation. Moving toward a series of deep shadows cast by the fusion reactor to his rear, he spotted a lone jackal running away and toward a series of panels secured to the wall. The Marine who alerted the group opened fire at once, spraying several display monitors with fire and missing dearly. The jackal was too agile, sidestepping the fire and retreating to a recessed alcove within the massive machinery of the engineering deck. By the time Solomon got into an optimal firing position to stop the jackal from doing something stupid, the Marine, Corporal Jessup, finally found purchase in the small of the alien's back, a 7.62mm armor-piercing round, shredding the frail body with a starburst of blood and viscera. Solomon looked farther down the room to see the scaly, outstretched arm of the jackal tapped a button on a display node, then immediately crumpled to the ground. The plumage on its dorsal side, splaying wild as a crater, erupted with deep purple blood from its back, collapsing to the floor. "Shit, he came out of nowhere." "Sorry, Sarge," the Marine said, exasperated from the chase. "Never mind that, Corporal," Sergeant Lopez replied. "What the hell did that buzzard just do on that monitor?" The group jogged over to look at the damage and saw a shattered screen covered in the jackal's blood, alien symbols scrolling across the screen. "I think we're in the clear, sir," one of the Marines said. "But your guess is as good as mine. Anyone read Covenant?" "Shut up, Corporal," Sergeant Lopez barked. "Don't waste the LT's time." "But you're right. Doesn't look like anything." Before the sergeant could finish his sentence, a harsh alarm klaxon sounded, filling the engineering deck with a harsh screeching sound, amber and violet lights flashing. Sergeant Arjun Devi didn't want to risk hailing the lieutenant on his compad for fear that, however unlikely, there were Covenant Signals intelligence analysts on the bridge. If he attempted communication, he was confident they wouldn't be able to crack their frequency-jumping, encrypted transmissions, but that they would pick up the transmissions themselves. It didn't take a genius to figure out rogue signals meant trouble. The burly sergeant had a grizzled face with several pockmarked scars from years of fighting the Covenant. Standing almost 2 meters tall, he towered over the rest of his team, fearlessly navigating the narrow corridors they found themselves in. He wondered if Charlie team had located the power plant yet. Although the vessel was only a few hundred meters in length, the narrow engineering catwalks made the trek slow going. They had been walking for several minutes, taking out an unsuspecting Covenant soldier here and there. Only one of them had been armed, but the unsuspecting turkey only carried a plasma pistol on its hip. By the time the sergeant had fired a burp of subsonic suppressed rounds from his M7 submachine gun, it was too late. The alien never stood a chance. Several more minutes of the same song and dance passed, navigating narrow hallways and backtracking several times to come across dead ends, drop-offs, or other obstacles that were unpassable without compromising their concealment to the Covenant crew. The 4 Marines came across a narrow bridge now, tentatively fastened to the deck over a sheer cliff which opened to a maw of darkness below. Farther beyond to their target, Sergeant Devi could see the hallway open up to a well-lit passageway. "I don't know about you, gents, but that looks like a pretty important door," he said. Even with such a small complement of crew, there were still 2 of the tall bipedal elite warriors standing vigil in front of a large metallic door. Several minutes of observation ticked off the mission clock. The fire team could tell they would have to be dispatched quickly if they stood any chance of breaching the command deck and taking control of the bridge. Paying homage to their nickname, the pair of guards seemed completely alert and undeterred at the fact they were standing post on a support vessel, away from the fleet where the fighting was. Years of fighting led Sergeant Devi to realize that these elite warriors were the tactical and operational leaders of both the Covenant fleets and their armies, often leading literally from the front to maintain their honor and status among their troops. "That's gotta be the bridge, Sarge," a Marine whispered. "What's the play?" There weren't many options for taking the pair down quickly and quietly. They still had to navigate the narrow bridge in front of them without being detected. After that, they'd need to establish a superior firing position and overwhelm the elites. If they had time to take cover, the aliens would inevitably sound the alarm, kill them all, or retreat through the reinforced bridge doors to safety. He looked up and down, struggling to find a suitable location across the bridge to get the drop on them. He located a recessed crawl space just large enough for his smallest trooper in an elevated position near a ventilation shaft. Sergeant Devi motioned for the smallest Marine to come forward and indicated the position several meters above the bridge on the far side. "Take my M7, he said, and outlined the plan. "When we're in position past the bridge, I'll signal you. Do not open fire until we're in position. If you miss or run out of ammo in the mag before dropping the second one, we'll need to step in." The Marine handed off his own MA-5B and traded with the sergeant, exchanging magazine and other gear to make his profile smaller. The fire team began crossing the narrow bridge with the smaller Marine in the front. Sergeant Devi and another trooper boosted the young Marine as high as they could, scrambling to find purchase on the lip of the recessed ledge without making too much noise. Now that the Marine was safely in position, the trio of Marines on the main deck maneuvered deftly into position on line and abreast of each other. One of the Marines pulled a nutrition bar out of a pouch on his utility belt and wrenched his arm back in a position to chuck it across the last few meters before the guarded bulkhead. The ODSTs did not, save for a few exceptions, carry suppressors on this mission due to the hasty nature of Commander Keller's request. The only Marine to carry a suppressed weapon was Sergeant Devi, which was why he gave it to the Marine on overwatch. The Marine to his left would take the bar of food and throw it as hard as he could down the hallway to the elite's flank in hopes that distraction would buy them enough time for Lance Corporal Myers to overwhelm both of the aliens' shields, in time for Sergeant Devi and crew to finish them off. The fire team leader clicked his comm device twice, signaling they were in position and ready to proceed. He received a comm click in return and motioned for the Marine to his left to throw the bar of food. No sooner had he thrown the nutrition bar than it made a loud clang on a pipe running parallel to the deck about 3 meters from the left elite's head. Both sentries turned their head in unison at the sound, raising their plasma rifles in the general direction the noise came from. Lance Corporal Myers seized the opportunity and raked a long burst of fire over the closest elite, bullets raining down from his elevated position. The first burst stitched the elite's body from leg to shoulder on his left side, his shield unit glimmering in the light, then overloading just as quickly with discharge static dancing across his armor plates. Before the fatal shot could land on target, the elite stumbled forward and began to spin around toward the source of the gunfire. Big mistake. Fire, Sergeant Devi shouted and put a burst of 7.62mm rounds through the elite's unshielded torso, dispatching it with ease. By now, the second elite was privy to the ambush and began to place his palm on a control panel attached to the doorway, and simultaneously fired one-handed toward the trio of troopers hidden in a shadow farther down the hallway. Lance Corporal Myers took the distraction in stride and shifted his fire from the first elite to the other and raked him with another burst from his submachine gun. His weapon ran dry before the elite's shielding failed, however, and the doorway iris opened to a cramped command deck with several startled Sanghili, Ungoy, and Kigyar crewmen. The injured elite stumbled inside and immediately locked down the door behind him. "Shit!" Sergeant Devi exclaimed. "Myers, get your ass down from there and link up," he barked. He was as mad at himself for missing the follow-on shots to the second elite as he was at Myers for not dropping the hinge head before he could escape. "Prep that TCC on the doorway, we're blasting our way in." The fire team scrambled as quickly as they could to the door, placing several cords of thermite carbon cord on the seams of the bulkhead and provided security. There wasn't a doubt in the sergeant's mind that reinforcements would soon be on the way. One of the ODSTs finished preparing the breaching charge and commanded, "Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole!" The four took cover behind a mass of pipes and supply crates. A moment later, their visors automatically tinted their visors as the compartment ignited in a brilliant flash of light. "Get your asses up," the sergeant commanded. Grenades! At once, the team formed on the periphery of the doorway was now radiating with heat from white-hot slag and tossed several fragmentation and flash grenades into the bridge. Another dazzling flash of light erupted from the room, and Sergeant Devi could hear the panicked commands of the shipmaster before a muffled boom shuddered under their boots. They breached the doorway and dispatched the remaining Covenant warriors, either writhing on the deck or attempting to reach for their weapons, too stunned to do anything else. Sergeant Devi strolled up to what looked like the commander's chair and surveyed the holographic display monitors surrounding the shipmaster's seat. The other Marines took up positions around the room to collect data and provide security. "Oh no," one of the Marines muttered. It was Lance Corporal Myers. Devi spun around to see what the problem was. "Sarge, you better take a look at this," the junior ODST trailed off with concern in his voice. He walked over to another display monitor. The long, spindly fingers of a dead elite was still grasping a circular, rod-shaped device that protruded from a computer console, flashing orange glow emanating from a holographic projection with other alien hieroglyphs dancing over the rod. The most troubling thing was the video feed directly above the display. It enlarged to show the local star system, including the Oort cloud where the Death's Hand was hitting and the gas giant they were currently orbiting. Another planet showed up on the display and a small vessel emerging. It sure as hell didn't look like a human vessel to the sergeant. "What am I looking at here, Myers?" Sergeant Devi said. "How much time do we have?" He began to raise Lieutenant Green on comms. "Hard to tell. Looks like an attack vector to me. I'd give it a few minutes. Tops." "Sir, Sergeant Devi here," he said over squad comm. "We're made." "Sorry, sir. We've got another Covenant vessel bearing on our position. We need to get out of here ASAP." "Looks like another Covenant ship heading this way, Sergeant," he replied. "How the hell did that happen? I thought we were alone out here." "That's why the commander wanted us to capture this stupid octopus in the first place. Beats me, Sarge, but we gotta get the hell out of here pronto." Alarm lights flashed over every console on the bridge and an ear-splitting klaxon started chiming. The jig was up for Teal Force, and it was looking like it was up to Solomon and his team to plant the Octanitrocubane charge and rendezvous with Delta Team back at the egress point.